Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and I'm not going to lie, I hope we got a banger of a video for you guys today. I had my concerns, or I really haven't given my thoughts out about the new champion that's coming out, which is going to be Sun Wukong. And I won't deny that there's some mystique and some mysteries, and I did hear some new information recently about him, and just a general consensus about this champion. But this is the first time that I'm ever aware of Raid Shadow Legends or Plarium or anybody, the powers that be, for lack of better words, kind of do a champion spotlight on Sun Wukong. So there is a video that we're going to take a look into, and then also from here we're going to talk about the summoning crystals that are currently out right now, or the Prism Crystal event that we got coming, that's currently active right now. I wanted to give you guys my thoughts about it, and we can kind of talk about some of the champions you can look forward to and just see how it goes from there, you know? Anyways, let's get into the video.
Hello, everyone. We hope you're prepared, as today's champion spotlight is going to be a real adventure.
So far, I can tell he looks cool.
But don't worry, we've got the perfect guide for such an epic quest.
Yeah, he looks cool.
One and only Sun Wukong.
Sun Wu?
Okay, I may have been exaggerating. You don't actually have to make any dangerous pilgrimages to recruit this legendary Skinwalker champion. Just log into the game 7 times between August 22nd and October 23rd, and Wukong will pledge his staff to your service.
Side note, 23rd is my birthday, let's go, woo woo.
Don't go panicking if you miss out on this 7-day loyalty program. Sun Wukong will be available to summon via shards once it ends on October 31st. Now, let's see what this Monkey King can do. With Wukong being an attack-type champion, he's got some divine strength behind his attacks. Let's start with his default skill, Gotcha. A pretty standard skill, Wukong thwacks one enemy with his trusty staff with a 25% chance to place a stun debuff on them. If your target's under any buffs, this chance increases to a scary
right off the rip, I love the animation, and I love the cinematography that they're doing with the champion. I think that's super dope. And I also like that they're giving us an in-game experience or like a visual of like how the abilities are going to work. So that's really cool.
That staff is pretty heavy. It's no wonder then that it'll leave someone seeing stars. Not only is the staff heavy, but it's magical. The aptly named Staff of Wonder is Wukong's second skill, with Wukong striking a single opponent with a hefty blow, ignoring 50% of their defense. If this wondrous attack kills the target, any surplus damage will be dealt as an additional AoE attack to the remaining enemies, also ignoring 50% of their defense, but lacking the ability to crit. If the attack doesn't kill, Wukong's got a devious trick up his sleeve. Rather than dealing AoE damage, Staff of Wonder will turn its target into a sheep for 1 turn. Ta-da! There's no blocking this transformation. The target will just have to bear it.
So he said there's no blocking this transformation. So like Stone Skin, Block Bust, none of that stops it, for the lack of better words. Now, he didn't say it would be resisted, so I believe that the way the understanding of this is that you still have to play the gamble or the accuracy versus resistance factor, and that may contribute to, you know, some chance success rates or some failures, and then of course, you know, just you understand how like that whole conundrum follows through.
That's funny. Wukong's penchant for trickery continues with his third skill. Now you see us.
Side note, sheep. Oh God.
With the help of some mystical clones, this AoE attack sees the Great Sage stealing all buffs from the enemy team, smacking them upside the head, and then placing block buffs on them for 2 turns for good measure. Support champions really hate this guy. Obviously, you want to time this skill so you steal as many buffs from the enemy team as possible before landing the follow-up strike. If you manage to steal some increased attack or increased crit damage buffs, expect this to deal some serious damage. The monkey business doesn't end there. If Wukong does bite the dust, his passive skill, Unbeatable Wukong, will bring him back with full health and full turn meter 3 turns later. A nasty surprise for any enemy. This automatic revive should take the pressure off your healers. As you know, he'll spring back to life in no time.
Okay, so if the enemy gets a turn, then you get a turn, then the third turn he comes up. That's cool.
Aura skill, which increases ally speed in the arena by an impressive 28%. That'll add a nice little spring in your step.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
So to recap, Sun Wukong is a tricky champion who excels at debilitating the enemy, whether it's stunning them with his default skill or stealing all their buffs for himself. The unblockable sheep debuff from Staff of Wonder will give your enemies quite the headache, especially if you time it to disable their most important champion at a critical moment. Consider pairing Wukong with champions who can apply counterattack, because the stun placed by Gotcha is too good to ignore. As for artifacts, Wukong does need accuracy to make the most of skills like Gotcha and Now You See Us. At the same time, the usual damage dealer mix of speed, attack, crit damage, and crit rate are all useful stats to boost. You can see a few artifact suggestions on screen right now, but there's no shortage of viable sets for this plucky primate. That's all we have for this spotlight.
Plucky primate.
Be sure to
I like
jump
how he
into
said that.
Raid to recruit Sun Wukong to your cause. Like and subscribe for more Raid content. And let us know what you think of this mischievous monkey in the comments below. Happy raiding.
All right, I'm not gonna lie. When I saw this, I'm tremendously excited, and let me explain why. I'm gonna break down his list here and kind of show you guys a little something that you can kind of look forward to in terms of like how his booking situation is gonna be. I think I did a count. The A1's like 4, the A2 is another 4, so that's about like what, 8 books right there. Then the A3 is 7, so 9, 10, 11, it's about 11 books. That's about on par for like your anywhere between like 10 to 15, I think, is within the expectations of like books for most legendaries. But allow me to explain why I think this champion is going to be super cool. So, like, the sheep factor is nasty, right? And then ignoring percent of the target's defense is also nasty. So, like, you have a lot of multi-folded like aspects of how you can build them. And they're not wrong. You have that diversity. I will not lie, though, however, there is some mechanics that kind of involve, in terms of, like, meta for, like, PvP. And I'm going to go kind of on the PvP side a little bit more with him here. You know, you have to worry about sheep itself on being from polymorph and whatnot. I believe there may be a factor where like sheep itself from, so I'm not sure if this is the case, but it's possible that like he may or may not be influenced by that at all. So he's actually like a really good viable option to take that on. And then the buff strip. The buff strip for me is the thing that, or in this case, buff steal. Let me be a little more clarifying there. The buff steal is actually kind of substantial because for my account in particular, I don't have a buff stealer like Ceres, for example. And a lot of times when you're going against specific compositions, like you may be going a go first team and you're going against a go second style team, and the only reason why they're living and they're able to beat you, for as an example, right? They may be able to potentially beat you is because of the fact that you couldn't break through their stone skin or any of their abilities that are, you know, buffs that were keeping them alive, you know, that strength and that extra shield that they got, right? With Wukong, he kind of takes that away from everybody. You know what I mean? Like that whole problem is now gone. And then on top of that too, he's punishing them by putting block buffs in addition to that. So not only are you stealing their buffs, but you're also preventing them from buffing themselves in the future, making them a lot more susceptible to straight up damage that you're going to be able to apply as your team rotates in. And that's something I don't have on my team, right? In addition to that, the fact that he has a 28% aura. Now, mind you, it's not the higher inside. I think the highest is like Lord Shazar with like 32% or something like that. And then, of course, Arbiter and some of the other ones that are around 30. He's not as fast as that, but even then, having a utility style champion, that's kind of how I view him, is that he's more of like a utility style, or he would be better suited for utility style instead of just raw damage. I feel like if I had to choose between the two, I think he is more utility with complementary damage instead of being a damage dealer with complementary, you know, utility. I think the utility side speaks more to me than the damage side of things, and that's all things considered. I haven't seen his multipliers and all that stuff like that, but just the way his kit sounds to me screams more in the lines of like you want to get the value out of him from a utility standpoint, and then you can apply pressure from a damage standpoint after the fact. So, you know, being able to balance out those stats and whatnot are going to be very important. He did the narrator of this of the video did kind of point out to like perception, for example, which is a valuable, you know, asset in terms of like set bonuses. So you get accuracy, which helps him land stuff. You also get the speed, which, you know, speed is king in this game. You always kind of want to go faster than your opponents, or, you know, go within a certain speed range because it benefits you, right? And of course, you know, perception is one of those sets that will enable both of those stats in a sense. So that's really, really good. In addition to that, though, you do have like the option for like nuker sets or something around those lines. So I think maybe like a healthy balance or a healthy combination of two would be pretty ideal for him. I will say that the type of experiences that we're going to have in the near future when it comes to like PvP meta, I think it's going to evolve a little bit, considering that he's going to be in place. So like go second type teams could have some struggle with that. Being able to sheep opponents, specific ones in addition to that. So like, you know, imagine, I'm just going to throw a hypothetical, and this is all just like a battle of semantics, so just take it with a grain of salt. But imagine a Sun Wukong who can go with like a extra turn type setup with Relentless, for example. He strips the enemy, gets an extra turn. Then he does sheep to one of your more pivotal survival champions. Like, for example, I use Necrid. By stripping him, that makes him susceptible to maybe getting sheeped, right? Or in general, like, since it can be blocked, you know, and then you're playing the battle of, like, resistance versus his accuracy. And if you know, that Necrid doesn't have enough accuracy, or enough resistance, excuse me, then, you know, your accuracy can rain through and you get that sheep. Next thing you know, all the ally protection that he was giving off to his opponents that were keeping him alive with the extra shields, all that is gone for that one period. That opens up a window of opportunity for you, right? just as an example of like various different ways you can do it. Same is also true for like passives and all these other different champions that got these values. You can kind of remove them out of the picture by sheeping them. So like that's actually some really cool utility and some case uses, right? Now I do think that if we wanted to bank into his damage a little bit more, I do like the aspect that his A2 has a 50% ignore for the target of his choice, which is kind of cool. But I honestly don't know how I feel, because like stun makes you susceptible to polymorph, which is a problem. Block buffs also makes you susceptible to, you know, polymorph. I believe that if the sheep goes through no matter what, then I think you're less likely. I think the debuff is applied, and as a result of that, you don't get sheeped back. Or actually, it's still technically true, because there's been times where I would do a debuff on somebody. The debuff would land, but I would still get sheeped. And now, mind you, I'm using, like, for example, Ragash is one of my go-to nukers, and he does have 2 debuffs. So maybe the first debuff, which is maybe the decreased defense, didn't activate the polyproc, but the stun did, you know, the attempt to apply the stun did, and that ultimately led to my champion getting, you know, polymorphed, and that could be a possibility. But it would be interesting to see how that dynamic or how that utility works. So if you guys know how that works, then feel free to give me a comment in the comments below, so I can, you know, maybe spitball some ideas. But the way I interpret him right off the rip right now is that he would be a complementary utility champion for me to utilize in compositions in arena that are very valuable. So like automatically as a slot in, this champion speaks to me in terms of like value, right? So that's automatically a W there. Now let's take it out of picture. They did showcase in particular one spot of the video. Let me see if I can pull it up real quickly here. However, you got like a bunch of different stuff going on, so give me a second. Inside this video itself, they had a portion where they were showing specific areas where you could see some value at, or where he was being used at. And in particular, I saw another spider, and I didn't think about this, but like that's a way to negate the mechanic. You know, not only are you stripping them of their buffs, which is the counterattack, right? And I believe the way the description of the ability works is that it is applied, and I'm reading off to the side here. Before attacking, it steals all buffs, so it doesn't proc the counterattack. Right, so he strips that counterattack so that they're no longer useless, the spiderlings, and then, you know, he puts the block buffs on there so that they won't be able to reapply it on themselves or anything around those lines. So very big value in that regard, and I feel like that's something that's super underrated in terms of like another area that he could be useful in, right? I also thought about Hydra. Block buffs is a very I did a showcase or not only a showcase, but I did a couple videos of describing about various different iterations of the fight that you have to kind of prepare for, and one of the big debuffs that you want to bring to your team is block buffs, because it disables the Hydra heads a lot, right? So him in that regard is also valuable too, and then he could be a complementary damage dealer after the fact, right? A lot of times whenever you're first building up concepts for teams and whatnot, you know, your block buff champion, depending on who it is, brings block buff, but that's about it, right? Or maybe, you know, you are in a little bit on the higher side of things, and you have like maybe an Ugo, for example, who provides you that block debuffs and can technically enable your team with decreased defense, but their damage output is leaving something to be desired. So he is an alternative approach to a otherwise aggressive style of compositions for like something like Hydra, which may be valuable for your team depending on, you know, circumstance and composition. You know, that's always going to be a factor, right? But just in general, I think that this champion, will he carry a early game to like mid game, late game champions? I think early mid, maybe not so much as visible, you know, of an option, but I think when you start getting into specific type of contents like PvP, for example, or specific niche areas like Hydra, which I consider to be more of a late game to end game composition, you know, you need developed champions, you need a plethora of champions that do specific things and multitude of things, and like that becomes very, very specific, right? So like that's more of like a late game function in that regard, and I feel like Sun Wukong kind of fits in that pocket, in that realm, where like he's specifically for something in particular, but it works very well. I think that the only thing that I have a complaint about, and it's not even so much a complaint, it's just more of like a observation about my concept of what I got going on my teams, and that is champions that are spirit based right now. I wouldn't say they're not valuable for me, because like if you look in terms of like the meta for champions that are not void, so we're excluding all void champions at this point. There's a lot of champions that are force based, and you got your Ukos, you got Pythions, just to name a few, right? Those champions are seen throughout a lot of live arena. Like I'm currently in gold right now as we speak, and I'm not gonna lie, you know, they're pretty prevalent. You see them quite often. So like having a Spirit Affinity champion is great, right? To combat that from an affinity standpoint. But in the same spectrum too, you got to be careful with having too many champions of the same affinity, because if you are going against a negative affinity, for example, if you're picking nothing but spirit, a lot of your outlets are spirit based, and they go heavy magic. You know, case in point like Rotos or or some other well-known established champions that are there. I've seen Elva, for example, who is a Magic-based champion, who is starting to see a little bit more spotlight from what I could tell whenever I'm playing an arena. You know, whether it's live or classic or tag team for that matter. I see her become a little bit more commonplace, right? And as a result of that, someone like Sun Wukong, his performance will degrade as a result of going against the affinity composition. Now, will he completely be ignored or be irrelevant in those type of scenarios where Elva isn't playing? No, not necessarily. But it is just one of those factors that you have to keep in mind. You know, at the end of the day, the way we were looking at it is like he is a utility champion with complementary damage. Well, if we're banking on that complementary damage, we need to make sure that we are going against the right opportunities, the right affinities that match in favor of us, right? Not in favor of the enemy. So we have to be very conscious of that. And that's the only part where I feel like it's a little bit of a negative is that Sun Wukong is a spirited champion, and my particular team already has like a lot of spirit focused champions, so it's a little something that I have to be observant about. Maybe I need to reformulate my team, who knows, you know. But with that being said, that's where my consensus is. I think this champion is going to be very, very solid. I think that he's going to provide a lot of alternative options to teams that may exist in your comps already, or in your accounts already. And he'll be an additional champion that will be an audible, a change, or a variable that now players may have to play around. Is he going to be groundbreaking or meta-defying? I think that like the Distilled and Mariska terraces are still going to be relevant. But I do think that for the most part, this champion is going to bring something to the table, and just as A2 alone makes that very, very unique. When you add that with, you know, stripping or stealing buffs, and then block buffs, and then the extra control that he brings to the table, maybe you got something of a monster waiting in the rounds. Now the revive, I think that's another thing that I would say is kind of a questionable W or a questionable L, because, you know, you don't want to bank on your champion or getting the value out of a passive where it's conditional upon you dying. That's never like a ideal situation. But I will propose some options in terms of like champions. Like, you know, we recently had the release of Valkonen as a part of the Call of the Arbiter series, who's a Void champion. He didn't see as well of a reception so far. I think that like everybody's talking about how Sheep is going to be too prominent. He's going to basically conduce himself to that. And then one of his strongest parts of his kit or his abilities is conditional upon killing people on your team. And you know, you have to basically not only account for that, but to revitalize it. It just changes the dynamic of your team. Maybe something like Sun Wukong being one of those champions that automatically revives on his own, opens that door. So you could be a little more negligent about like, oh, let me reestablish this champion that I killed for the sake of Valkonen. Well, it's like, all right, I know he's coming back. He's a ticking time bomb. Maybe we can bring him back over here, you know, in the next couple of turns while we still push our agenda through Valkonen, for example. And that may be an option where that may be something cool. But I will say that, like, depending on the same case too, is like, you know, if everybody's dying, or, you know, that's pretty much the end of the fight, and you're not even going to get to the 3 turns, does it even matter then at that point? And I feel like that's something to kind of worry about. They didn't express any type of cooldowns on this either, so that's interesting to know. Maybe you could continue to do that, and if that's the case, then maybe a combination like Valkonen would actually be super nasty, you know? Who knows? Who knows? At the end of all, it's all speculation, and I want you guys to approach new champions as they come out with an open mind, and that's what I've been trying to do when it comes to this. I do think that aesthetically, the way this champion looks is just top tier. I used to play a game called Smite, which is a MOBA based off of mythology. When it comes to like various different, you know, ethoses, or whether you're talking about like, you know, Greek mythology or Norse mythology, and it's like a combination of those. And amongst those was Sun Wukong, and there are some comparables that look very, very identical when it comes to like those two games, including, you know, Raid and Smite. But just in general, the way that this champion looks, he looks super dope. And I'm actually very, very excited to see him come into fruition, and maybe I'll be able to bring him to something of a monster in the arena. We'll have to see. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think. Do you like Sun Wukong? Do you think he's kind of bad? I don't know. I'm very, very curious. Now, with all that being said, I also think that this champion is going to be one of those interesting ones that, depending on if you want to go from that route of like utility, he may be a little bit more as a like a new flavor type of deal. You may see him show up more often in the current meta, but will he stay in there is pretty much what I would argue. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure if he's going to be 100% meta. He's going to be on the top end side of arenas. You're going to see him a lot. You know, I'm not sure about all that, but I do think that like with the right team and the right amount of effort, you might see something in there. As a matter of fact, I recently had the chance of building up my own Emic, as well as going against my own an enemy's Emic. Who was the most recent fusion we had. And believe it or not, depending on the right scenario, Emic is a monster in arena. Like, you know, you would have to be very, very careful with him. You know, with like maybe tethered to a lockout champion, you know, you're basically completely locked down where you can only target Emic, or you can't use your abilities because you're attacking Emic only and you're proccing his passive, and then during that period you're also getting someone like maybe a Warlord. That's what I went against in Live Arena, and it sucked. I was like, what do I do to this? The one window of opportunity I have, I wasn't able to seal the deal, and that ultimately led to me losing, and that's unfortunate. But it is something to keep in mind. It's like, when you look at this champion from a first glance, it's like, well, is he worth it? And I think the best thing you could do for yourself is like, well, what if I add him into this composition with this champion? Does that bring something that's exciting for me? No. Okay, how about this way? Like, try to plug and play him in various different scenarios and see what he brings to the table to your team. And if it sounds like it's going to be something better, then it may be worth, seeing through. And that's the main thing. Now, I am going to let this run finish up. I've been farming a little bit on the Ice Golem side. Right now, I'm currently holding number 1. But I did want to talk to you guys a little bit about the recent Prism crystals that have come out recently, and I got my 2 pennies on that. I'm going to be honest with you guys. This one's a little bit more of an interesting one. There was some changes that were made to the way that they're handling some chance rates and the amount of cost for Prism crystals to be able to do it. And those kind of bring me a little bit more of a concern in terms of like what we should expect for Prism crystals moving forward. But allow me to explain. So, Summon Crystal, the current Summon Prism Crystal event that's currently active right now has to do with Hydra Specialists. We got Hydra Clash out. It makes sense, right? From my perspective and what I need for my account, this is a phenomenal pull. Even for stuff I don't need, this is still a phenomenal pool of champions to pull from, right? Now, before we even talk about the champions and their value, look at the Prism Shard cost. It's 80, but it also comes with legendaries at 10% chance rate and epics at 90%. There are no rares, and I think that was one of the biggest arguments that came from the first Prism Crystal event, was that they didn't want any rares in the mix. We wanted to see, only the higher quality. Now, we are starting to see some Void champions in play, but they're none at the Lego side of things, and that makes you kind of wonder, like, what are they doing? Are they intentionally avoiding using Legos in the pool for Prism crystals? If so, why? It's a very genuine question I have, right? Now, with that being said, the 80 cost is a little bit higher. It went from 20 to 80, right? If I remember correctly, it was like 20 or 30 or something like that. So it's more than double the cost, and that kind of is a little disheartening. However, the chance rate of drop is also in the same aspect doubled or maybe even tripled depending on the numbers if you do the number crunching. It's super valuable, right? The likelihood of you being able to hit a legendary is still only going to be 10%, but if what you get is of this caliber, I would say that it is a good investment for champion-wise, right? The champion quality is now what I'm going to talk into play. And allow me to explain. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of skim through it. Korgar is an Ogrin who has like a lot of ally protections, turn meter boosting, things of that sort. So I haven't used him in Hydra myself. However, I think there could be something there, and I find that to be very interesting. Uko, on the other hand, is actually amongst some of the actual comps that you see in Hydra from various different ranges, and the reason why is that he provides block buffs, which is one of the more key staple parts of like player survivability, player control within Hydra, right? But on top of that, he also has increased speed and a revive that gives block damage. So like, there's a lot of opportunity to bounce back. Ally speed in all in all battles by 20% from an aura. There's a lot of value. It has a chance to proc an decrease attack, which is good in Hydra, right? Not only at a 50%, but when it's fully booked, 60, 75% chance. That's not too bad across all enemies. It's very, 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 very valuable. So. That rings supreme in terms of champions. I talked about Contra. I did the showcase for Necmo, and she was one of the ones that also showed out amongst that showcase, even though she wasn't the focus. She is phenomenal, from my Provoker standpoint. One of the best, in my opinion, right? So, enough said there. Walking Tomb Drain, debatably, I would say yay or nay. And I don't know how I feel about him being particularly focused around Hydra content, but I could see it, like it just as a damage dealer outlet. He does have a equalize HP, which could be very clutch depending on the scenario. But outside of that, I'm not entirely sure. I think that if I had a Walking Tomb Drain, I would probably utilize him somewhere elsewhere. And if he was just to sit in a composition that had to do with Hydra, he would just be a complementary DPS, and that would be his main focus, right? Necmo, enough said. We did a showcase on it. Go see that video. You can kind of see why he's literally got tier, right? Tatura, I just recently got one myself, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see a composition around Tatura or that includes Tatura that would be dedicated towards Hydra. I don't see it personally. So for me, I felt like that one may have been a throwaway. Kind of like one of those ones where we just needed to fill up the pool. and he's not seeing a lot of light, so maybe they're trying to get more visibility towards him. That's the only thing I can think of. But I don't necessarily see him as a Hydra specialist, right? And then the same is also true for Archbishop Pintori when it comes to being a good block debuff or block buff champion, kind of similar to Uko, but from a spirit affinity range. Very, very valuable. Shields, increased defense, heals, the whole 9 yards. Very, very strong for a champion in terms of being able to add that extra little bit of control. So, you know, he's up there. I agree with him being a Hydra specialist. I get it. I see it. Duchess, self-explanatory. She's good everywhere. You know, like, take it from someone who owns her. She's God tier. Enough said. And I guess I could say why. And I did it in some of the specific cases of videos. You know, block debuff is good for Blight. Veil's good for Torment. You know, increased attack is good for all heads because you want to do more damage. Resing in case things go south, great. Damage mitigation, great. Speed increase in all battles, great. Shielding, great. She does it all. She's great. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of how it says. Now, here's another one that may be kind of controversial in a sense, but it depends on how you look at it. From a straight-up Hydra standpoint, I do not see Theodore as that. I do acknowledge that he does have a strong decreased speed in terms of hitting all enemies and maybe providing some substance there. But in actuality, I don't think I would put him in higher tier fights of like brutal or nightmare territory content for Hydra. I don't see him being a focus, right? The same is true for like increased speed. That's nice and all that, but like the poison outlets, which is pretty much where most of his damage comes from, and the activations of those, and any HP burns he gets. Remember, he doesn't put HP burns on himself. He could just activate them, right? Poison falls off in Hydra. It's not one of the go-to desired debuffs if you're looking for damage. You're more so looking for like HP burn or something around those lines, or any max HP hitters. You know, you're looking for that form of outlets for damage more so than poisons. Poisons kind of falls off a little bit there, right? Now, needless to say, you know, increasing resistance, making him potentially a viable option for a mission tank. I do acknowledge that. And then, of course, having accuracy makes him a little bit more accurate without having to force it onto your actual builds, right? I get it. He's a great champion, but I wouldn't suit him necessarily there for the value of Hydra. And I think that's kind of like a thing that I would cautionally say that I feel like this was a champion that was thrown in just to make the pool look better. You know what I mean? Like, you're not just filling up spots. Now we just were like, I want to incentivize players to want to buy stuff for this particular pool of champions. And amongst them, we'll throw in a really, really strong champion who's good in other areas of the game. And I think that's how I feel like when I see, you know, Tatura or Theodore currently. Like, Tatura is just there to fill up the pool, which I don't know why. And then Theodore, I don't know why, but I think that this is a great champion that would be worth getting, and as a result, may be more enticing for players to get, right? Maybe you're looking at some of these champions like, you know what, I don't want Walking Tomb for Hydra, but I could use him in, like, maybe that Sand Devils team for stage 25, or maybe I could use him for the team, you know, in Ice Golem or something like that, you know? So, like, although that these champions I'm looking at them from a Hydra's perspective, they are good in their own respective spots. And then there are some champions like Contra, for example, Uko, to name a few, who are great in not only those other areas, like Uko and Arena can be obnoxious, but in Hydra, he's still also phenomenal as well, right? So, I think that, like, that's my rationale when I see these champions. Like, why are you adding these to the pool and you're labeling it a Hydra specialist? Because I don't see these two being crazy. Now, normal, or like basically the very first level or the very first difficulty of Hydra, yeah, you can practically throw anything you want in there, and Theodore could be amongst those, and it does provide you some value, right? But is there better? And that's the question I leave you when it comes to whether or not this champion is really a Hydra specialist or not, okay? Now, Snake Track, although he may not be all that ideal in other areas of games, I do agree that he is a Hydra-based champion that has value, you know? Ally Protect, Reflect Damage, decrease attack, decrease speed, all very valuable assets in relation to Hydra content. And then, of course, being able to do extra leeches, which is great from a sustain standpoint. Great. I mean, he may be a alternative version to something like a Nekbo. Maybe a little bit weaker, but a alternative version to something like Nekbo, or maybe even Razzlebark, you know, and something of that likeness in terms of providing leech, providing some decreased speed. You know, those are some things that you can kind of see him approaching. And maybe slap him with like a Provoke set or a curse set, and you get that Hex or that Provoke out that may be a little bit more complementary. So, not a bad champion. Cupidus is just a straight-out damage dealer, but when you tether him with someone like Venus, you get more value out of him. So, I actually place him amongst all the other champions in this particular pool as a high value because I have a Venus, right? So, I have one piece of the puzzle that, this guy is a part of. And those two together are amongst some of the better brutal to maybe even nightmare teams that exist inside content relating to Hydra, right? So I could see value from him being in that, providing HP burns to all enemies, being able to provide increased attack to himself, and then doing damage, and then, of course, counterattacking, which is probably the bread and butter behind him being so valuable in Hydra, is that you slap him in a damage build that's based off of, hexing or provoking or something like that, and because he's counterattacking so much, it's kind of similar to how, I'm approaching my Coronar, who does a lot of counterattacking based on debuffs being on the enemy, right? Decreased attack, decreased defense, decreased speed, for example. Those are all pretty good debuffs to have out and play, and as a result, if you ever get hit by one of those heads that does that, he gets a chance to counterattack, he hits all enemies, which means that you have a chance to apply a provoke again, right? Because I'm using him in provoke set. So something similar to that in Cupidus, or you could just straight say, I want damage and let him go, right? It's definitely possible, and I could see him thriving in those type of environments as a byproduct of that. Now, Mashalid, for me, I don't necessarily know how I feel about this one because it's a hit or miss for me. He does provide increased crit damage and increased speed, and you can keep that up almost guaranteed in the right tune. The continuous heals may not be too bad, but that's a blessing and a curse if you're not careful, and that's something I want to be mindful of, as well as the extra damage where he would splash out a little more. So, I look at it more as a damage dealer with the added benefit of being able to provide some speed utility, right? But I don't necessarily look at this champion as a direct go-to for Hydra. I think he is a option that if you didn't have options, you would probably look at, right? But in this particular regard, I look at Mashalid more in the lines of clan boss teams for Demon Lord, going 2-1s or maybe even higher speeds than that when it comes to clan boss teams and compositions. He has his own teams named after him for Mantos Salad or something like that. I don't know exactly what it is, but there are some team compositions that incorporate him, and he's a primary focus as a part of that team composition, and that's why he's in them, right? And then, of course, maybe even in PvP, you might see him be one of those type of champions that does a lot of damage, and he also has the chance of being able to strip buffs or steal buffs, kind of similar to maybe some Wukong in the future. So I can see him in those regards, but maybe not so much there. Now, I'm not going to go through all the epics and all that stuff like that, but I will say overall, amongst all the options you can have for epics in this particular type of content for Hydra, I agree. You got the Ugos, you got the, Rectus, who's a mini Duchess, you got Shamail, counterattack to Torment, Oboro, Mischief Tank, Whisper, a strong damage outlet that can get extra turns, you can go look at Saphir for that one. But there's a lot of options there, Husk being enemy max HP and a secondary provoker, Seeker, Terminator Booster with chance to provoke, they're there, they're very present, very good selection by player when it comes to the choices for epic. So no complaints whatsoever. Very, very impressed with them. Some of the Legos a little questionable, but I would be keen to it. I'm completely down with it. I think I'm being very critical with the ones that I question, like for example Mashallah, Tatura, and even Theodore. I'm being very critical of them because on the scale of from 0 to 100 for being very, very valuable, they're either in the middle of the pack or maybe slightly above it, depending on the circumstance. And I think that's the thing. Whereas someone like Duchess, she's always going to be on the top side of that bracket. Someone like Contra or maybe even Uko, top side of that. Necmo for what he does in his compositions, top of the line. You're looking at them and you're like, yeah, that's Timothy. That's the one I want to get for my teams because that would enable this for me. So I look at those as things that I would questionably say about the choices, but I think overall this is a very, very good W. I wish that the summon price wasn't as high. I will also say this and go on record that without spending any type of money into this game when it comes to this particular summoning option, I hope that they continue to do similar, at the very least similar, to what they did from the previous Prism Crystal event, which was that they added events that allowed you to farm, and then as a result of that, you would acquire crystal fragments, and then you could do your summons that way. I like that idea. I think that's valuable. I think that's healthy. It gives you the opportunity to, but I do think it also sucks too that you have to use those crystals if you are going to before this event period ends, because if you don't, then they're going to be force used, and then whatever's left over gets kept for the next event. Like these 10, I didn't have 20 or 30 to summon from the last one, so it trickled over, right? I wish you had the option to just say straight up, I want to hold these for a rainy day. And that'd be cool, because then you could stockpile and go for one that may be beneficial for you. Maybe you don't need any of these champions, or you don't want an extra of these champions, and you're like, you know what, I'm good. And that's okay. But you don't get that option with this type of event. So, you have to kind of, quantify, all right, I do want these champions. I need to make sure I got it, but I don't have enough to buy, or I'm going to have enough just to have a little bit left over, and I want to use that leftover. And then, you would have to consider spending at that point, which I'm never going to force anybody. I don't want anybody to think that, but, is it reasonable at that point for you to spin for it? And that's going to be a very, very hard question to answer. I think when we get a chance to do some summon pulls ourselves, we'll get to see if that 10% is really something, or is it just kind of like, well, you know, it's only 10%. You know, like there's that feeling. And I will go on record and I'll say that like these type of like percentages and whatnot, they can turn out to be something substantial. Don't scoff at 15% or 10%. That's the thing, right? But I'm not gonna go for a 10% when it's $99 to get that many to summon. You know, thank you, player, for providing the ad. But like my point being is that like you have to quantify if these champions are worthwhile for you, and then is the summon range by which you summon, is it valuable for you too as well? And that's something for you to keep for yourselves. If you decide to, let me know in the comments below. I definitely would like to hear that. And with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always, guys, always remember, stay ascended.
Quick to get the